Hello, this is Justin of the Tech Train here, and with the huge popularity among students of the computer game Fortnite, I thought I'd take the opportunity to cover a quick tutorial in PowerPoint on creating your own custom themes. So I'm going to show you in this tutorial how to create a theme in PowerPoint that pays homage to the computer game Fortnite, and we're going to take this opportunity to look at four things. The first thing I want to look at is shapes. How to create shapes, how to manipulate shapes. We're also going to cover layering, how to layer those shapes correctly. We're going to look at cropping of shapes rather than of pictures. A lot of people say you can't do that, but you can, and I'll show you how to crop shapes exactly to your slide. And finally, also look at the slide master. So let's get started. So I have a new PowerPoint presentation here. The first thing I'm going to do is change the layout to blank and start with a clean, blank, fresh slide. Now what I'm going to do is start with the hills, and to draw the hills I'm going to go to the Insert menu, Shapes, and then choose this curve shape here. Now before I do that, I'm going to just zoom out a little bit so that I can see around the outside of this, which you'll see makes a bit of a difference. So these are going to be the hills at the front. I'm going to start off the slide somewhere over here, click, and then when I let go of the mouse, I get a line which I can then click, and each time I click it, it creates a point on the curve. So I'm just going to be creating some smooth hills like this, 3 or 4 hills along the outside. Now once I get to the outside of the slide again, I'm just going to click anywhere and just click a few times so that I create a complete shape like that. Once I've done that, I'm going to change the outline so it has no outline, and then I'm going to change the shape fill. The general color I'm going for is green, but I want to add a gradient. So what I'm going to do is go back into shape fill and choose gradient, and I'm just going to choose this one here that has a dark section at the top left, but I'm going to tweak that a little bit. So back into shape fill, gradient, and then click more gradients. That brings up this one here. I've got 3 little tabs here for the gradient stops. I'm going to choose the last one and just make it a slight bit yellower. So I'm going to do it for a slightly yellower sort of a green. So it's somewhere over here, perhaps like that, just to give it a bit more depth. And I'm going to make this one on the left hand side slightly darker as well. So I'm going to make that slightly darker and just change the tint slightly as well. There we are. So I can just play around with how those look, but that looks about right to me. So once I've got my hills here, the next thing I want to do is to add a second layer of hills. I'm simply going to do that by copying this one, having a duplicate copy of it, and then I'm actually going to click rotate and then flip horizontal so that the hills behind are a slightly different color. I'm going to click on those hills and send to back, just like that, and then just change them slightly in order to create a slightly different shape, something like that. Perhaps just stretch them out slightly further, like that, and bring the one on the right in slightly. There we are, that'll do. So I've got my hills. Now, of course, what you'll notice is that those hills are overlapping the outside of the slide. Now that's okay. I mean, when you play this PowerPoint presentation, you won't see that bit around the outside, but it can look a little bit scruffy. So how do we get rid of those? You can't just select that part and get rid of it. And if you click on a shape, you go to the Format menu, the Crop tool, which you'd normally see on the right-hand side somewhere if this was a picture, is not there. But you can still crop a shape. The trick is to start off with another shape. I'm going to go to the rectangle tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle just covering the part of the shape I want to get rid of. Notice how it snaps to the edge of the slide, which is perfect. So I'm going to click that shape there, and then I'm going to select the hills at the front, and then holding down Shift, I click on that shape there. And then in the Drawing Tools Format ribbon, I can come over here to Merge Shapes and choose Subtract, making sure that you click the hills first and then the shape. So there we are, we've cropped the hills. Let's do that again. So we create a shape, overlap the part of the shape we want to get rid of, click on the shape we want to keep, holding shift down, click on the shape you want to get rid of, merge shapes and subtract. And I'm going to do that for the parts along the bottom as well. Now I can't actually see where the bottom of the slide is, but that doesn't matter, because if I start over here and bring up, you'll see that the shape sort of snaps to the bottom of the slide. So I know that it's about there, and it will snap. But you can actually tell where you are if you like, because if I go to the home button and I choose select and selection pane, I'm actually going to make the freeform shapes invisible by clicking the eye. And now I can easily make sure that this is in the right place. I did actually have it in the wrong place there, so I know that it is snapped up against the bottom of the slide. I can then bring back the visibility of those shapes, and I can even send this to the back by dragging it down to the bottom here, so I know which one it is I want to get rid of. So I want to get rid of the bottom part of this shape, so I click on it, hold down shift, click on the rectangle, and then format, merge shapes, subtract. There we are. And then we just got the bit on the right hand side, so let's do that very quickly. So I can see the side of the slide here, so I don't need the selection pane at the moment. Click on the hills, click on the rectangle and subtract. And then one final bit to get rid of, and that's this bit on the right, like that. So that's the hills at the back, subtract. There we are. So I've now got my hills, my hill section, and nicely cropped to the slide. The next thing I'm going to do is some mountains perhaps at the back. So a very similar idea. I'm going to zoom out again, insert shapes and use the curve tool, but I'm going to try and make these a little bit steeper, so sort of more mountainy. That's probably a little bit too steep there. Let's get rid of that and try that one again. So something perhaps more like that. There we go. So just a couple of mountains like that, and then again finish the shape off. And this is going to be roughly a purple colour, so I'm going to choose purple and get rid of the outline. And then of course we need to send this to the back, so I'm going to right click on it and choose send to back. Now I'm not going to crop this shape yet, not until we're completely ready with it. So what I'm going to do is something like that, that will do. And then perhaps have another copy of those, which I'm going to flip horizontally just to make a difference, and bring one of those perhaps somewhere over there so it overlaps. Looking a little bit messy at the moment. Let's add a gradient to these mountains here. So I'm going to click on those mountains, click on gradient, and just go for something like that perhaps. And then this one here will have an opposite gradient just to give it a little bit more depth, something like that. There we are. I'm going to just change the gradient just to have a little bit more gradient visible, something like that. Bringing the stops together creates a sort of a sharper edge to the gradient. There we are, something like that. So there's a bit of a contrast between the mount at the back and this one. Now I'm going to bring up my selection pane again, and I can see that this mountain here is right at the front. I want to bring that right to the very back. So when you're layering, when you bring up the selection pane, the item at the top is the one at the front and the item at the bottom is the one at the back. So imagine you're sitting somewhere above this panel looking directly down on it. So this shape here, which is the hill at the front, will hide whatever is in behind it, and so forth. So this shape at the very bottom is one that will only be visible very slightly. Now once I've got the shapes in the right position and coloured, I can now get rid of the bits around the outside. So I'm going to draw a rectangle over here and subtract that. Then another rectangle on the right hand side, and just make sure that covers up completely, and then subtract that, and then we'll have another one on the right hand side there. The subtract shape tool wasn't available in older versions of PowerPoint, but if you have a current version, then certainly it will be there available for you. And then finally one more shape at the bottom, like that. And just because I can't remember now which one of those it is, let's just check. So it's freeform shape 23, and click on that and subtract like that. There we are. So just make that a bit wider perhaps, like that. There we go. Now I don't want the mountains to be quite as purple as that. I want them to be a bit faded, but that's fine because I'm going to add sky now, and I'm actually going to add the sky in two layers, one of which will be behind the mountains and another one in front of the mountains with a slight transparency, which will make those mountains fade into the background a little bit. So let's do that now. Let's add in a rectangle, which I'm just going to cover over the whole of the slide, like that. It's going to be blue, no outline of course, but I will want a gradient here as well. So let's click on more gradients. And then we can add some stops to this. So this needs to be sort of a darker blue perhaps in the top left corner, and then coming to a fairly faint blue, and then finally a much lighter blue, something like that. Perhaps that looks good. Now what I'm going to do, if I go back into the home menu and bring up the selection pane, this one here, by the way, if you want to name some of these, you can do so. For example, that could be called Sky 1. This one here, that's the hills at the front, so I can rename those. It doesn't make any difference as far as the PowerPoint presentation is concerned, but if you've got a lot of shapes, it does make it easier to know which one you're on, and making them visible and invisible can make a big difference as well. Now this sky, for example, I want this sky to be behind the green hills but in front of both of the purple hills. So let's check which one's which. Hills at the back, so that's hill back. This one here, that's the mountains at the front, so mount front, which means this one obviously is the mountain at the back. So now looking down on this, we can see that the sky is obviously in the wrong place. It needs to be in front of both of the mountains, like that. But I actually want a copy of the sky at the very back as well. So I'm going to duplicate that by pressing Ctrl D. Just snap that back into position and drag that all the way to the back behind everything. So we have two skies, one at the back, which looks just like that, and one that's in front of the mountains, which I'm now going to change the transparency of to allow the mountains to just bleed through from the distance. So I'm going to go to the Format menu, Shape Fill, and then click on More Fill Colors, and then just change the transparency to somewhere around 50-ish. Let's try that. Something, no, that's not quite right. Let's just try that again. So Format, Shape Fill, let's go into the Gradients menu, there we are, and change the transparency here. So something like about 50%, let's do that. You can see as I'm just increasing that gradient, the mountains are just starting to bleed through a little bit, so just increase that. Now it's only bleeding through on the right because I have this color stop selected. You can set the transparency to the individual stops along your gradient. So I'm going to click on this one and increase the gradient on that one a little bit. No, we aren't too much. And then that darker one, again, like that. So I'm going to just increase the transparency on that one slightly. Something like that. There we are. Just so it's a faint sort of suggestion there of mountains in the background. This is a very sort of obviously sort of comic style drawing here. We're not looking for realism, but now we've got the shapes there. We've added gradients, we've layered them, we've cropped those shapes. The next thing probably is to think about having this now as a template rather than something that's on an individual slide, because if you were to duplicate this, you'd obviously have that slide on there. But if you wanted to add a new slide and let's say go for a title and content, then you're just going to be back to your plain boring slide. So rather than doing that, the best thing is to have this as a template. It also means that if you were to just have these individual slides, you're going to still be accidentally clicking on these bits and messing them around as you're moving the parts on top of it, which isn't good either. So the thing to do here is to first of all select all of these parts now that we've got all of that, and I'm going to right click and group them into a single object now. So what I'm going to do now, making sure that's in the right place, I'm going to select it and cut it. Control X or right click and cut. Now to get to the master slide, which is the template slide, you need to click on View and then click on Slide Master. Now here you'll see all the individual templates, all the individual layouts, but what you want to do is go right to the top and you'll see that there's one at the very top which is much larger than the others. And you can see there's a kind of family tree. Basically each of these layouts will inherit whatever style or theme or changes you make to this overall master slide at the top. So clicking on that one, I'm then going to paste my picture directly onto it, which you'll see now affects all of the other slide layouts as well. That's all I need to do, so I'm going to click on Close Master View, and now if I click on New Slide, you can see that whatever layout I choose for the next slide, I'm going to end up with that background. So that's just perfect. Now once I've got that, the next thing probably is to do the little sign that I showed you. So let's have a look at how we can do that little yellow sign. So now that I'm on the slide, you notice I can't actually now click on these hills or drag them or mess them around, which is perfect because that's what I want. What I'm going to do is start by adding a simple rectangle, something like that. Let's zoom a little bit on that one. So I've got my rectangle. I'm going to get rid of the line around the outside and I'm going to fill it with an orange colour like that. And I'm just going to add a bit of a gradient, in fact, so I'm going to click on that and add a gradient and just perhaps tweak that slightly. So back into gradient, more gradients. So I can just tweak that and just make that a little bit lighter. So let's go to more colours, just increase that lighting slightly. There we are, that'll do. So now that I've got my basic shape, what I need to do is to rough it up, because the labels, the signs in the game Fortnite aren't squares, they are a bit torn and damaged. So what I'm going to do is two things here. First of all, I'm going to get rid of these straight edges by right clicking on it and edit points. And you'll see that now I've got these little black dots, which I'm not going to touch, but I am looking at this red line around the outside. Putting my mouse onto the red line around 2/3 along, I can then drag that down, and basically what you're doing is creating, not quite as severe as that, but creating a sort of a dent in the sign. So let's just try that again. Right click on it, edit points, and I'm just bringing it down a little bit, not too much. And again on the side here, just to get rid of the idea that this is a complete square, and then do a little bit on this side here as well. There we are. So now that looks a little bit rougher, and you can play around obviously with the way that looks, no problem. Also the signs often have a nick in the side, so what I'm going to do now is the same as we did for cropping the shape. So I'm going to go to Shape, grab a triangle, something like that, rotate it, and the overlap part here is where the cutout or the nick will be. So exactly the same as we did for the cropping. I'm going to click on the label, the bit I want to keep first, hold down Shift, click on the shape I want to use as the cutout, and then subtract, which gives me that little sort of nick, so it looks like a torn bit of paper. So you can see the two things together, the distorting of the edges and the nick, does give it quite a good effect. But I need to add a shadow as well. The shadow in Fortnite's quite sharp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Format and then Shape Effects, Shadow. I'm going to add a basic shadow like that, but I'm going to tweak it. So back into Shape Effects, Shadow, and then Shadow Options. And I'm going to make the shadow a little bit bigger, but I'm also going to reduce the blur so it's a lot sharper. So it's a bit like that. The transparency also is quite high, so I'm going to reduce that down to, well, probably something like 20 or 30. There we are. Just add a very slight bit of blur, but literally I'm only adding Yeah, I think just 1 point blur on that. And there we are. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is add the basic text in there. So let's just edit text and write tech tray. Then I'm going to click on the edge of the shape and we're going to play around with the font. So first of all, the color of that needs to be black. It needs to be a lot larger. You can use, to increase the font size, obviously you've got the size option here in the home tab. You've got these two little buttons here which will increase and decrease it, but what I like to do is to hold the control key down and then use the square brackets, which just after the letter P. And the square brackets in conjunction with the control key allow you to increase and decrease the font size. Now the font itself needs to be changed, and I'm going to choose bolder, this one here, so bolder font, which I happen to have installed anyway, which is actually quite similar to some of the text in the Fortnite game. And there we are. We've now got our label, we've got the background, we've used shapes, we've used layering, we've used the slide master, and we also used the cropping ability to crop the shapes and create some good effects. I did, I think on the other one, show you a cloud in the sky as well, which is really simple really. It's just simply a circle, which I then coloured white, got rid of the outline of course, and then by doing Control D to create duplicates, Control D rather, we're just simply layering those clouds, layering those circles over to create a cartoon style cloud like that. And then once you've done that, you can select all of those, group it like that, and then you've got your cloud. And what you can do then is resize that cloud and put them where you want to. If I duplicate that, I can then flip that horizontally to make the cloud look a little different, rotate it perhaps slightly as well, change the size. So although you've just created one cloud, you can actually make the cloud look significantly different depending on where you put it. I'm going to layer that back, so let's send that to the back. Now the clouds are a little bit too stark, so what I'm going to do now is change that. So I'm going to change the color of these clouds to, if I just select all three rather, to a sort of pale blue, so that it looks similar to the, there we are, the transparency effect we had earlier. So something like that perhaps. So there we are. I hope that was interesting for you. If you did find that interesting, please do like this video. Feel free to share it as well. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do so. And when you do, don't forget to click the little bell so that you actually get notifications when a new video goes live. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Please do click that like button before you go, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.